Hi, everybody. Welcome to Milton Resnick and Passlof Foundation. This is the former home and studio of Milton Resnick. This floor specifically was his studio for many years, and his final studio was on the third floor of this building, which is preserved, so if you haven't been up there, you should check it out. My name's Alex. I'm the program director here. I've been with the foundation since 2020. One of the very many roles that I play here is to produce events like this one. And over the past 3 years of being here, I have this growing feeling that I have a responsibility to build community, to create space for public discourse, for poetry, and for painting. We're a very small team in a very big building. There's only 3 full-time staff members. Susan Reynolds, the executive director, who's sitting in the back. Violet Peng, who's taking a photo of me, and myself. And outside of the daily operations, we have a board of trustees. We have an exhibition committee, and we also just hired a part-time archivist to help us manage and organize the things that both Pat Passlof and Milton Resnick left behind. Ultimately, since the inception of the foundation, this is a place for painting. Over the past 3 years, I like to think that we've also made it a place for poetry and for music. I'm gonna share just one poem from both Matthew and Milton that are not on the walls, but they are in the book, because the poems are what gave my vision for this exhibition clarity. The exhibition for me is truly about the poetry, and it's about meaning making and finding meaning in your life. So before I do that, I've been asked to give a little context to the exhibition, to tell you all how it came to be. You can read this story in the exhibition catalog. You can also read more poems in the catalog. So Milton Resnick and Matthew Wong, super unlikely pair to combine their work. Very, very unlikely. At the risk of sounding egotistical, I like to think that I'm the only person that could have possibly come up with this idea. And I don't mean to say that like I'm a genius or something, but it just felt like serendipity to me. It felt like right place, right time, and I just happened to be that person. It happened because I met Matthew Wong's parents here at the foundation. I met them in 2021 through a mutual connection of Chime and Read Gallery. They used to represent Milton's work, and they currently represent the estate of Matthew Wong. They asked to come here. They wanted to see how we have created a public-facing institution out of Milton's former home and studio. And so I walked around the building with them and talked to them for about an hour and just showed them around, showed them what we'd been up to. I was very new here at the time, so I didn't have too much to say. But on their way out, Monita, his mother, she said to me that Milton was one of Matthew's favorite painters, and that he had a lot of influence over Matthew's work, which was surprising to me. It kind of struck me in this way where I didn't really understand. First, I didn't understand why she was telling me this, and second, I didn't understand how that could be. So I questioned it, but this notion, it just stayed in my head. It kept echoing for a long time, for many, many months. And the more I looked at Milton's figurative work and these landscape works from the end of his life, the more I could actually see what she was talking about, this influence that he might have had over Matthew. And so I felt like I needed to investigate this idea much further. And at the time I was also reading a lot of Milton's poetry from the same time period, and I started to realize that Milton's poems really supported the paintings that he was making, and it kind of felt like they were one in the same. Because I see a lot of poetry in Milton's work, in his visual work. But then when you read the words that he chooses, it adds a lot of weight to the paintings. And so I thought like I needed to find out whether Matthew Wong was also a poet, because that was going to determine whether or not there was some connection here. And to my surprise, he did. I found some poems on the internet. I found a couple of poems in some books that were published by Chime and Read, and when I read them, it somehow something just clicked for me. It was like I had this fantasy that Milton and Matthew were these kindred spirits, and then when I read Matthew's poems, like that fantasy became reality, and it was just I couldn't deny it anymore. So I had to propose this idea to the exhibition committee, and I did so very cautiously, because when I first got hired here, Susan told me, "You will not curate an exhibition here. That is not what your job is." And so that was what I thought in my mind, is I'm never going to curate a show here, and that's fine with me because I don't want to. But when I had this idea, like when I saw these works, when I read these poems, it wasn't a choice for me anymore. I had to do it. So I proposed it to the committee, and with some reluctance, I convinced them to let me also propose this to John Chime and to Monita Wong. So I met with John Chime. I shared my vision with him. I was very surprised at his response because he was sort of glowing with curiosity and interest. He told me that, like, before I could even finish my thought, he said, I want to propose this idea to Monita. I want to propose this idea, and I want you to do this show, but under one condition, which is that I am not going to curate this show with you. You're going to curate it by yourself because it's your idea and it has nothing to do with me. So I think you need to take ownership and you need to do it. So that was also very surprising, pretty humbling. And Monita, she responded well. She seemed interested. It wasn't a yes, but she seemed interested. She came here. She happened to be in New York, like around the same time that I proposed this. And she came here, and I showed her some of Milton's work that I was thinking about. And again, she did not say yes, but she said she was interested. So after, long story short, 16 months later, 16 very stressful months later, we had a book printed and art on the walls. And I experienced one of the most proud moments of my life, being able to share this emotional and personal project with friends, and my family was here. So yeah, that's what this show's about for me. It's about feeling and following your feelings and following what you believe in, like believing in yourself and vision that you have and sticking with it. So anyway, I'm gonna read a couple poems and then I'll leave the rest to Alvin. The first poem I'll read, it's called Wanted. It's by Matthew Wong. You are an unassuming silhouette on a beige wall. You carried grief for the future while you were inside your mother. You were not born with the ability to make strangers, especially of the opposite sex, feel safe in your presence. You implode upon getting into a handshake with someone whose palms know no sweat. You do not believe in an afterlife. You believe in an afterlife. You cringe at the sight of a telephone, but high places make you feel fantastic. In the first 5 seconds of standing on a casino floor, even more so. But you do not have enough change on you for a single chip. You have what it takes to sharpen a pencil. You can, on a good day, press the right buttons so that the sky becomes your baseball cap and magic happens in between each blink. And this poem is from Milton. It's from a series of poems called Miles Away from Pat. I learned something new because Saturn was in conjunction with bleeding Jupiter. The last thing I want to understand. You have to work in the dark. Let it be, I don't want realism, at least very little. And I know beautiful Venus opens space. You have to have a lot of luck with the woman, but in the absence of ideal, you must work with diminished color. Let museums do what they want. The shadows know the way home. And then I actually have one more poem I'm going to read. It's just to sort of lighten the mood. This is a haiku that I wrote a couple weeks ago while I was riding my bike. The midday moon, whoa, I wondered when we'd meet again. Alvin Eng. I met Alvin very recently. I met him at the end of 2023, is that right? Yeah. So I met him at the end of last year. I had just gotten back from a long trip to Korea, and while I was gone, Susan had mentioned that this man was so excited about your exhibition. He wants to talk to you, and he wants to know more. So she said that he wanted to invite her, and then Alvin emailed us and asked us to come to a reading from his book, Our Laundry, Our Town. And so I read a little bit about Alvin, and then just reading his email, I was very intrigued. He seemed pretty interesting to me. So Susan and I went to the reading, and immediately I was like, yes, we're working with this guy. He is insane. Like, this guy has so much energy. I need him in the foundation as much as possible. And that's how I was feeling like at the time. I still feel that way. I really like you, Alvin. Like, I really like working with you. It's been a true pleasure. But anyway, Alvin had this idea. He thought, how connected are you to the Asian American community in New York? Well, we're not. We just occupy space in Chinatown. And that's how Milton was too, I think. But anyway, we've been working on this for a couple months now, and I'm really glad that you all are here. I'm glad that we could do this, and thank you to all these artists for being here, taking the time to respond to my show, and yeah, Alvin, thank you again. Alvin he's a native New Yorker from Queens. He's a playwright, a memoirist, performer, and an educator. If you haven't seen him play guitar, that's a shame because it's amazing. His memoir that I mentioned earlier, Our Laundry, Our Town, was published by Fordham University Press. 3 Trees, which was the first of Alvin's portrait plays, series of historical dramas about artists, was published by No Passport Press. And he's currently developing a solo acoustic punk raconteur performance piece, Here Comes Johnny Yen Again. His honors include Fulbright Specialist and NYSCA NIFA Fellowships, LMCC grants, and Alvin's works have been seen off-Broadway as well as in Paris, Hong Kong, and Guangzhou, China. So please welcome Alvin Eng.
And again, for our wonderful program director and the curator of this great show, Alex Paul Chapin. Okay. Well, welcome everyone, and welcome to our pre-Lunar New Year event. It's and closing week pre-Lunar New Year event, so I'm so glad you could all be here. And because I come from the theater, I believe in dialogue, not diatribe. And as the world is getting more and more polarized every moment, dialogue is getting even harder. It's more vital than ever, but it's also harder to find and definitely harder to cultivate. So that's why this intergenerational, interdisciplinary show, this wonderful show, this U+ME show of the paintings and poetry of Milton Resnick and Matthew Wong, it resonated so much with me. Like, yes, I got so much affirmation and psychological, spiritual nourishment from this show like I haven't had for a long time. So I just loved it. I'm a long-time admirer of Milton Resnick's work, so to see some of his images and his poetry with some of the images and poetry from Matthew Wong, it just struck a chord with me that I haven't felt or heard in so long. And as Alex said, once I felt and heard this chord, my first impulse was, here we are in Chinatown. I said it would be great to have an Asian American audience see this. So, and as you mentioned, and they were crazy enough to say yes. So here we are. So I'm so glad we could do this here tonight. So this is about that. And so for this, I am of course very grateful to Susan, Alex, and everyone here at the Milton Resnick and Passlof Foundation. Thank you so much. This is it's a great honor. And of course, I'm grateful to all the guest artists who are here tonight, and most of all, to you. To make, yes, it's true, I come from the theater, so without you, we're nothing, you know, so yes, everyone always says that, but that is the truth, so yes, so glad everyone's here for this this closing week pre-Lunar New Year thing. It's interesting that this closes on the year, the year the dragon begins, so there's something there, not quite sure what it is yet, but I know there's something there, so, you know. We'll find it. So, yes, okay, so this is a wonderful. Please join me now. We're going to introduce all of the our guest artists here too. So I just want to say so in alphabetical order. And okay, and a little show business. Well, when I introduce everyone, just say hi. So this is Yuchen Chang. And Yuchen works in an interdisciplinary manner. Writing is weaving. Drawing as translation, teaching as hospitality, commerce as social experiment, and publishing as a dandelion spreading its seeds. By constantly entering and exiting each medium, she strolls against the category of things, the labor division among people. She's currently an artist in residence at SMAC Maryland, and in April, some of her work will be on display in their open studios. So thank you. Okay. Lanie Lee. Lanie Lee is a Chinese-American-born artist, born and raised in the Bronx. She received a Pollock-Krasner grant and has had artist residencies at the MacDowell Colony, Alpha Hills Papermaking in Japan, and at Mass MoCA. She's been in numerous exhibits, including PS1 and the legendary Basement Workshop. In 2022, her solo exhibition, Passages Through Time, was on view at the New York Public Library's Hudson Park branch. And in April and May of this year, Lanie will be organizing a new exhibition for the Hudson Park branch called Crossroads, the Influence of Other Cultures in Artists' Works. So Lanie Lee, yes. Stefani Marr. Stefani Marr is an artist, designer, and she explores materials and forms to examine current and perennial obsessions. Born in Seattle, Washington, she attended art school at the CCAC, graduated from UC Berkeley, and she's been living and working in New York City since 1980. Her artworks include drawing, painting, sculpture, and installations that have been shown in galleries, museums, and in public spaces. Design works include clothing, textiles, and costumes, including a long-term association with the amazing Ping Chang and Company. In 2023, her solo exhibition, Natured, was presented by the Wilmer Jennings Gallery at the Ken Kelleher House. So, Stefani Marr. Helen Oji. Helen, yay. Helen Oji is a Sansei, third-generation Japanese-American. She's a painter, sculptor, and printmaker. Her work blends Asian American and European visual traditions and explores the synergy of gesture, paint, color, and shape. After earning her MA in painting from California, she moved to New York City in 1976, where she currently lives and works. So Helen Oji. And a quick note, both Stefani and Helen currently have work on view in the group exhibition Godzilla, Echoes from the 1990s Asian American Arts Network at the Eric Firestone Gallery through March 16th, 2024. I'm going to show you, it's great, and we have some other Godzilla members here tonight too, so let's hear it for all the Godzilla folks. And then Siyan Wong. Siyan sees the power of portraiture to share the human experience. A self-taught painter, an immigrant, and a workers' rights lawyer, her experiences inform her artistic vision. Her solo exhibition in fall of 2023, Lives of Three Canners, New York's Chinese elderly immigrants, was on view at the 456 Gallery in Manhattan. Her art is fiscally sponsored by NIFA and publicly funded. Siyan Wong. And you can see some of the artist's works just by going to the events page of the Resnick Passlof.org website, and on the events. I guess overnight we go from current exhibit to archived exhibit, just like that. So we'll be in the archived exhibit, but you can still see links to all their websites, and you can find more about them there. So we'll move on. Okay, so another of our themes here is tonight is and you can tell I don't speak Latin. Ut pictura poesis. I've been working on that for a week. That's a Horace quote that means, as it's painting, so is poetry. So in the spirit of the exhibition, of continuing this wonderful dialogue of poetry and painting, some of the artists were wonderful enough to write some poems in response to that. So we're going to hear some of that right now. Okay, not as smooth as Freddie Mercury when he takes it off the stage. Okay. Our first reader is going to be Lanie. So Lanie Lee.
Okay, I wrote a haiku for my reaction to the exhibit, and it's a very soulful exhibit. So, poetic paintings where the artists bare their souls, inner souls find peace.
Siyan.
Thank you. It's my first poem ever. I thought that was a fun challenge, so I thought I would try it. And I think I take from the show the desire to share a little bit about myself. So this is a little longer, so bear with me. If I must paint, you must sing or dance, or listen to the birds and write down their secret codes, the wisdom of knowing when to flee and where to be. For too long, my only companions in those early lonely hours, buried in transcripts and in my own written words, were the sounds of their chirpings. I wondered if they were cheering me on or mocking my naivete, the fruits of abundant lost sleep for one too many times. One-away shops, victory glows on paper and no more. Justice do matter, no? If I must follow my heart, leave my passion in the law, to show pain in the language of visual arts, will you not look away? We are one drop of water in the ocean of God. What's fame or status or things we don't need? Why not love and freedom in all our waking hours? If I must paint, you must too. Listen to that little bird in your head. Taste freedom and stay there.
A first poem, folks, a first poem. Okay. Yuchen.
thank you for that. It's beautiful. This is my third poem in my life.
We're multiplying.
Everything I've written has been letters to you. Everything I make, I wear, I touch and feel, all for you. This might be the reason why I haven't thought of poetry. It's redundant to think of poetry when I already constantly think of you. The origin of mythology might be gaps. Between stars we fill with lines to make figures and destiny. Between light and shadow we imagine a dog that eats the moon. Between geology eras we imagine birds fill the East Sea with stones. Between the planet Earth and human consciousness, we imagine a goddess Nuwa, sculptured people with mud and breathed life into them. You are my gap. You gifted me forever desire for unrealized actuality, acute imagination. I weave and carry a world that is not this one.
Okay, Stefani.
I'm not a poet, but I wrote a poem for you, Alvin.
Oh, and for Milton, everyone here.
Yes, and in response to U+ME. Wandering in the unfamiliar familiar. The day not particularly sunny, but vision clouded over immediately upon entering interior from exterior. Deep brown, green, muddy mountains. Thickets of pigment. Rendering form, not forms, but eyes incapable of seeing, of focusing. A revelation of commonality in death. Pain, a feeling of isolation. Despair. Hello, darkness, my old friend. But still, rhythm exists, open space exists, throbbing color too, exploding into graceful purpleness and records of amusing encounters. Respite from the dark, a movement towards Arcadia.
And Helen would like to share a reflection on her favorite painting here, too.
I don't write poems or prose, so I am, what I usually do is I write in my notebook, and usually there's some type of caption. If I see something out on the street or whatever, I'll put it in my notebook. It might be a list, but sometimes these captions or lists turn into my titles for my paintings. So that's how, and it also might turn into, painting or the title. So as I looked at the show, I have a picture of it here, but it's kind of dark. I love the painting Stargazing. It's downstairs, so it's, in the book it's number 26. But I love the painting. It looks like this. I don't know if you remember this, but it's on the wall to the right. But the reason I like it is because there's this texture, and then there's an image of the moon, the stars, and down lower there's, it looks like a boat that's turned upside down with a figure on it. What I like about it is that it's a lone figure, and that lone figure could be me. I mean, I related it to myself, but also the texture of the paint. And when I saw that painting, I wish I had painted it. So I was a little jealous. I went, oh, I wish I could have painted that painting, And that's what I feel a lot about Matthew Wong's work, is that when I I've been following his work for a few years, or whenever he had the show at, at Karma. Was that the first show? I don't know, there's been several shows. There's one at Karma, there was one at Kime Reed, and, or a couple there. Or there might have been two at Karma, but anyway, I'm just so attracted to his work. And the other piece that I loved, besides that, there are all three of these paintings have a lone figure in it, and quite emotional. So there's one that was, it's by Milton Resnick, that's right next to the other one, the stargazing, but it's called Scow. And there's also a single figure in there. But I love the movement of the paint, and very emotional. I know that I never really knew that Resnick painted figures. I'd only seen his abstract work, and I was always attracted by the layers of paint. So I really appreciate that, when I read in the book that he had a painting that weighed 300 pounds, you know? So.
I think more than one, right?
Yeah, more than that, but just going at it to get that image right. And I really appreciate that. The other one is another lone figure, and it's quite, I don't know, this is downstairs too, I believe. But it's that all the gooey paint, and then right down below is this tiny figure amongst the emotion, this emotion of the paint and the color. And though it's muted, it's just, you have a feeling of being in this grandiose, this atmosphere that could be, I don't know where you could be, the Grand Canyon or someplace. But anyway, those are my
Great, thank you.
favorite ones.
Such great images. I bet you could write a poem next time, right? Yes, 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 yes. See? Okay. Well, thank you all for getting us started that way. Again, in addition to ut pictura poesis, as is painting, so is poetry. Another major theme tonight is our conversation tonight is celebrating painting, poetry, and artistic dialogue in Chinatown. When Milton Resnick first moved here in 1976, this was the Lower East Side. By the late 1980s, Chinatown had expanded to include this block of Elger Street, too. In a 1995 poem, one of a series of poems entitled Untitled, Miles Away from Pat, for his wife, artist Pat Passlof, Milton Resnick wrote, "When you walk into Chinatown, you can't believe the little dramas. One day, you will get into trouble without coming to a conclusion. Starting with the first walled city of elitist beings, destroyed from a distance. We are doing time, expecting a hot welcome from partners. Tears are too late to bear. I don't want to see more egos in museums." Picking up this thread 20 years later, in 2015, Matthew Wong wrote in a poem entitled "For People," "Late in life, the magician acquired a dream that visits him several times a year. He, eating at a Chinese restaurant in a nameless American city somewhere in the Midwest, at the end of the meal, he cracks open his fortune cookie, and every time it says the same thing. Has your work come to nothing? No, it has come to this." And between these two, I feel like that's sort of, I just feel that captures the spirit of the show. And then during a recent conversation right here at the Foundation between artist Peter Shear and art historian John Yao, they both observed that they saw Asian influence in both Milton Resnick and Matthew Wong's work. So I'd love to ask the panel two-part, I think they're all two-part questions, you know. I'm a Gemini too. So do you see this Asian influence on both artists' work? And please talk about what is the Asian influence on your own work? So in any order.
Well, I see it's subtle, but I see meditative practices in their work. I see like a tranquility, and I think that there are some strokes or landscapes and the way that it's applied. But to me, I think it's like feeling their internalness, which is actually calming. You know? Even though they were going through some like strange things, it's still very, you feel like they're peaceful. So, and in my own work, was it Asian influences? Yes. Oh. So I'm influenced by Asian calligraphy and also ancient pictographs. So I incorporate them into patterns and also images, and I collage it.
Sure, thank you. Well, it's usually not my favorite question. I think it's actually extremely difficult to answer what's not influenced in me, in my practice by Asian. It is in my porous vocabulary, in my inconsistent grammar that you will find out soon, and in my face, in my name. And I've been developed a habit to push back to the question by asking, well then, Picasso was influenced by African mask, Cezanne was influenced by Japanese woodblock, John Cage by Suzuki, the Zen master, and I was born and raised in China. We'd like to brand it as a very distinct identity, but much of it has influenced from Sanskrit because of the import of Buddhism, and of course of Marxism. Which phase of influence are we talking about here? So, sorry for being a little bit...
That's fine, no need to apologize, it's fine.
Yes, but following actually the mentioning of pictogram, I think there's one thing I came to my mind when I was given a really informative tour by Alex and seeing how the text and images are put together on the wall. If we think of the wall as a canvas or as a frame, actually I think the coexistence of text and images are extremely Asian. Michael Sullivan wrote this book called Sanjue, Three Perfection, and the preface says this book wants to answer a question that a lot of Westerners who's interested in Chinese painting have long been asking: why and what do Chinese write on their paintings? And one answer to that is pictogram, that language and imagery came from one origin, and also they were made with the same brush, made with the same tool, and one educated literati is expected to be able to do all of them. So that the fact that they both practice poetry and painting, we might call that Asian. Yes. Mm.
Like I said, dialogue, not diatribe. You know, that's what we're here for. And just along those lines, I just want to take this moment where we wish that our friend and colleague Bing Lee could have been here tonight, but because he started a whole series called Picto Diary. So just he couldn't join us tonight, but I just ask everyone to please keep Bing in your thoughts. So something like that there. So yes.
Okay. So the first question, if I see the Asian influence in the artist's work, I see how they both flatten the space. Mm-hmm. And they do this with gesture. For instance, Resnick, he uses layers and layers of paint. It's not simple. I think he did a lot of struggling with his work, what I've seen, and just reading about him, he refined it, but then he would wipe it out and then he'd put more paint on. I could relate to some of that in my earlier work when I had done these very thick paintings. And then in Wong, he has the same effect. There's simple, but then at the same time, I could see that he uses his paint more economically. But then I see his influence of Van Gogh and Matisse and some other post-impressionists. But then I'm thinking about post-impressionists or thinking about Van Gogh and Gauguin. And those artists, they were all very influenced by Asian art, especially the ukiyo-e prints. And so I relate to that because my first experience with art was probably when I was 13, and I had this this teacher who taught a mini art history class, and so I grew up in a very small farming town. I had no experience going to a museum. My parents didn't take me to a museum. The first time I think I went was when I was able to drive. And so 16 or something like that, you know, and I could drive to San Francisco and go to a museum, or Sacramento, the Crocker Art Museum or something like that. And, but my parents did always draw. I remember my father drew cartoons, and my mother, you know, made Japanese food. And I went to the Buddhist church and that sort of thing. And then it wasn't until I went to my last year as an undergraduate, I was introduced to ukiyo-e prints, and it was during that time when there was the Asian American art movement in school. It was during the early 70s, the Vietnam War, the women's movement, the women artists movement in LA, and so I learned all of these things, but I really focused on my Japanese heritage and ukiyo-e prints, brush painting, anything Japanese. I looked at my first series of work was the Asian zodiac animals and Japanese myths, and I ended up making paintings of myself dressed up in a kimono, and they were self-portraits, so I'm discovering myself. You know, so that was, it's a really grounding moment for myself, and it has stayed with me.
About the work of Matthew Wong and Milton Resnick, I thought of what Helen said initially about the flatness of space, flattening out of space. I mean, that's sort of, you know, the kind of thing that everybody thinks about in terms of Asian painting. But this idea of the scholar who paints and writes, and relating to your Latin phrase, which I don't remember exactly what it is, but in as yes, please say it.
I'll try it again. Ut pictura poesis. Apologies to anyone who really speaks Latin.
So, as in painting, as in poetry painting?
As painting is poetry.
Yes, I think that there is some kind of connection there. There's a natural connection for sure in at least East Asian art, where, as has been mentioned, you know, the writing is right there on the painting. And there's always, there's also an interest in Western art of combining the word and image. You know, there's like been a lot of study and commentary about trying to incorporate text and image. A lot of people now do that, you know, Ed Ruscha. But that's also something that I've been interested in. I find it's a bit of a struggle to just figure out like what those words are supposed to be. Yeah. And how to pair it together so that it marries. Because I don't write Chinese calligraphy, which just flows, and as was mentioned, you're using the same tool to paint as to write, which is a perfect way of marrying text and image. But in Western tradition, it's really sort of like, okay, like in work that is influenced by commercial art, like Boucher or Barbara Kruger or Jenny Holzer, you know, it takes on this different format. But if you're trying to paint, you know, it's a struggle to find that language.
It's a very good question for the painters and the artists. I am a self-taught painter, artist, so I didn't see the Asian influence. I see that they were communicating to me a human experience that I really appreciated. As for my own work, not being trained in art school, I just, you know, come from that very same space. I just express myself. I don't know if there's any Asian influence.
That's fine, that's fine. I would say composition is always composition, whether it's musical phrasing, whether you're sequencing the works in an exhibit. It's all how we all composition. I feel like there's always a bleeding, if you will, like your sensibilities just inform that, and that brings us up to something that was brought up by Yuchen and other people too. We can clearly pinpoint what inspires us, but we get influenced by everything, consciously and subconsciously. So again, another two-parter. Do other mediums, such as poetry, music, literature, dance, theater, inform your process? And do you see parallels between Milton Resnick and Matthew Wong's paintings and poetry?
I'll take a stab at this. So I prepare my writing, so bear with me. So for the first question, yes. Each art form is a language, each has its rhythm, each brings you into a different zone, into a different space and time, touching on certain feelings and memories. Each has the power to make you feel a bit sad or joyful. So I enjoy all art forms. So when I listen to The Loneliest Monk, I'm always reminded of the beauty in nonconformity and taking a little risks. And reading poems like If I Must Die by Palestinian poet and writer Fayette Alahir inspired me to write my poem. So, and his poem is definitely worth reading if you haven't yet. And movies like the Apu trilogy by Bengali filmmaker Sayaji Ray, if you know of him, he really inspired me into digging into the experiences of my own people and show them. I actually was so inspired, I sat down and I wrote a short script for a film. And then I started working on a feature. I don't think you'll ever see it, but I had a lot of fun doing it. I recommend that when you feel so inspired to act on it. And for your second question, Alvin, do I see the parallel between Milton Resnick and Matthew Wong's paintings and poetry? Yes. I think they both examine the inner experiences, the feelings of loneliness, feelings of being out of place in the society. That's my reaction. Their feelings of being out of place in the society they live in, the inner anxiety of almost being in exile because the work they chose to do with their time was not necessarily seen, or the public didn't respond to it or care for it at that moment. There was no or not sufficient validation of their existence, that they mattered in this world. And I think that's particularly true for Matthew Wong. But when their body of work is seen together, people start to connect to them. And I think anytime you get to know someone on a very personal level, particularly if there was a connection, you fall in love, quote. The fact that they were writing and painting at the same time helped us connect with them for sure. But I think paintings, in my opinion, especially abstract expressionist paintings, do not help you understand the cause of the artist's feelings. They make you feel, but don't necessarily show why. Whereas I think poems movies and theater have the power to do that, or able to make case for why you feel a certain way. Abstract paintings are more akin to music, in my view. That's my personal thoughts on this. So their poetry helped us connect with their paintings and increasing our appreciation. That's my thoughts. Thank you.
For the first part, as far as pinpointing a medium that is inspiring, well, I think all of them inspire me, but I think they inspire the way I use paint or color. And then another form is dance and theater. For dance, I dance 3 to 5 days a week, you know. But in my work, it's the movement of the paint and the way I use color. And, you know, I always have some sort of dramatic movement in my work in some way. It's not always flat. There is always a movement of the paint. So all of these things inform the way that I paint, draw, or the feeling of each work. Is the parallels between Milton Resnick and Matthew Wong's work. I just seeing it in this space and the way that it's curated really made a difference for me. I don't know, I saw the associations. You made it beautifully curated, Alex, you know, and how they relate to each other. Each work. See what else they're expressionistic. They're similar in some ways, but quite different. I never knew, I knew Resnick's work, but I never really knew that he did figurative work. And to see these was quite compelling. I mean, I liked his other work too, but, I was here on Saturday and I was speaking to Jeffrey, was here. Where are you? I didn't know, before this book, I didn't know where the U+ME title came from. And so that was interesting to me, to see the two figures, and he explained that he was painting Adam and Eve. And I didn't know. I really didn't know that. So, but then he had a discussion with Pat, and she said, "Oh, that's to something." I can't remember exactly what he said, but she said something about having it being called U+ME instead. And so I like that, because then you could actually, the viewer could get in there and say, "Oh, that could be you and me," or whatever, you know. So. What's another thing? They both create ambiguity in their work because it's abstract and flattened with many layers, and you could see his struggle. I know there was an emotional component to it that, you know, but it created his mood and his direction, and through his eruption of brushstrokes and muted tones. Matthew Wong's work is, there were some of the same components, but I see some of the same components, but at the same time he uses brighter colors. And like dabs of paint. For instance, I love the two that there's two on the side here. It's called The Bridge and 3 dancers. You know, I thought that was so smart that they're right next to each other, along with the U+ME, but I see that there's some similarities. Anyway, but they're both very poetic, simple, and beautiful. Thanks.
One quick editorial note: the Jeffrey Helen references is a long Jeffrey Dorfman, longtime Milton Resnick biographer and accomplished artist in so many ways, and he's here tonight. So Jeffrey Dorfman, and he's always here on Saturdays too.
Just say something about the parallels between Resnick and Wong's work. They use poetry and painting to free themselves, I think, from their mental and physical pain. So I think it's kind of, for me, it's kind of obvious, but it's something that really freed them from what they were going through at that time.
The first question was influence across medium, right? We talked about this briefly. I actually, for some mysterious reason, is teaching a dance MFA right now, but I've never danced 0 day in a week. But it is actually because of how wildly interdisciplinary the school is structured that I was able to offer. We created this curriculum called Body Dictionary, and every week we talk about one body part. And today we talk about ear. And we did some scientific research, and it turned out the way we register sound is actually all haptic. It's actually extremely tangible and corporeal. So sound is dance. Sound is movement, sound is touch. So I guess it is through this class that I've discovered that disciplinary is actually something artificial that was invented afterwards, probably have something to do with labor division. But I believe that it is very natural for us to do this for a moment and do another thing for another moment and translate the wisdom and skill from one to another. April here is a bookmaker. I teach bookbinding too, and I've been very interested in weaving. And the earliest book form, some would argue, Coptic, came from socks. Because Egyptian people have figured out how to knit. It's not exactly knitting, it's called half-looping technique. But the way the spine of a Coptic is structured is exactly how the socks were made around the same times. We need warmth, and then we need stories, and we just use the same pair of hands and the same thoughtfulness. So sorry I keep pushing back on these questions, but I guess I've been trying very hard to insist that I do what I need to do, no matter how it's categorized in a museum or institution. And the second question is on parallel. I actually, when I first met Alex, I said these works are so beautifully sequenced and intersected. I wonder who curated. And I imagine curator to be someone older. and I was so surprised to see the checklist because I really thought they're so interwoven that there's a fusing of subjectivity that I very much enjoyed, especially in this occasion, how each one of them seemed to experience such loneliness, implicitly or explicitly. So this, I guess, parallel is when two lines don't meet, but in this case, I feel they're very much in each other's space. And it's truly the beauty of curation.
I have to agree that all the disciplines are equally inspirational, and that if you're a creative person, you can appreciate what anybody else does. And I think that there's also the tendency for us to try to categorize things that's not necessarily helpful. And I also think that as far as inspiration goes, that we are inspired by so many things that we don't even realize we're being inspired by. A lot of times the things that you think that you don't like are going to be the things that inspire you the most in some way or another. So, you know, a lot of times as artists, we get asked this question, what are your inspirations, you know? And I always had a hard time answering that question because I really feel like, how can I say there's one thing or 12 when there's more like 12,000?
True. Absolutely. Absolutely. And just as the notion of Chinatown has changed geographically, culturally, so has the definition of being Asian American. So does being an Asian American inform your artistic process, and has that changed over time?
So I think this is a very complex question. And for me, it's yes and no. And so yes, first, like many people, I came to the realization that I'm Asian American when I got to college. Not just human or immigrant, Chinese or American, but Asian American. It was in college that I placed myself in this broader context, like this awakening that I'm not just human. Second, I immigrated to the US when I was 11. So I have memories of being in the racial and ethnic majority. I'm not just a minority. That's like a concept that I also had to learn. So I knew that my accents and my poor English comprehension was something I can overcome and get good enough over time. But working in a profession with very few lawyers who looked like me and female, and I'm talking about specifically in labor law, I did feel underestimated and not given the high-profile cases. I don't know if it's just a feeling, but I did feel that way. And I also felt that I had extra litigation experiences because opposing counsel always prefer to litigate, not settle. And I wonder if it's because of my name or my voice when I get on the phone. But anyway, I experienced racism and sexism that some people say are results of unconscious bias, and other people say simply institutional and systemic racism. So yes, being Asian American informs my process to the extent that I am expressing my experiences and I happen to be Asian American. The answer is also no, because I came back to art later in life, like after 40. So my impetus for committing to being an artist comes from life experiences and observations of the world around me. I'm very intentional about the subject matter that I exhibit to the world. As someone who loved going to see art all my life, I always felt like an outsider in a museum, galleries, and many other art spaces where art is displayed. I remember how amazing I felt walking through an exhibit in a museum in Shanghai many years ago and seeing paintings of the everyday life of Chinese people in China. I felt I got to know the Chinese people in China. And I got to see people who looked like me on canvas, on a wall, in a cultural institution. And that's important, so it's my intention to place my experiences and what I see in my everyday life on canvas. Will my subject matter change over time? I hope so. Certainly, I think I'll get better at it when I get the chance to do it all the time. So that's my thoughts on this.
So when Alvin asked me to participate in this event, I asked him, how did this event come to be? And I wanted to know whether it was something that he proposed or whether the proposal came from the foundation side. And he told me that he proposed it. And the reason why I asked this question was because he was calling it wait a minute, something about like an evening in Chinatown?
Like celebrating artistic dialogue in China.
In Chinatown. Anyhow, he used the word in Chinatown, meaning that this is Chinatown here. And I said, okay, so I'll walk from my apartment on 8th Street between C and D and see if it feels like this is Chinatown or not. Because at one point, I lived on Mulberry Street in Little Italy, and at that time, this definitely felt like Chinatown. But coming from the other side, it doesn't feel so much like Chinatown. And you know, there was recently that New York Times map of neighborhoods and where people think the boundaries of their neighborhood ends, and you know, there were every boundary was overlapping. I mean, this is definitely one of those spaces. You know, when you turn the corner, there's the flower store. They're in full, you know, Chinese New Year mode. But on this side, on Eldridge, it doesn't feel quite the same. So it's really that lovely meeting. You know, it's the neighborhood. The Asian American question, you know, this gets complicated, but the short version is I grew up in Seattle where there were a lot of Asian Americans. And I was lucky enough to have art teachers who were Asian American. So there was never really that process of like, I don't see anyone like me. Yeah, I did see a lot of people like me. And some of them spoke Chinese, some of them didn't. Some of them could speak Japanese. There was a lot of, you know, half and half and throwing around of, you know, various phrases that are a mix of everything. Americanizing Chinese by giving it abbreviations. You know, so when you have that kind of experience, you don't really think about it consciously all the time. You know, you just are.
Well, my experience is different because I grew up in the Bronx, and it was a working class neighborhood, so very few Asians. And my parents had a restaurant, and they served Chinese and American food. So it's always been a cross-cultural thing with food and images in my work because I was influenced by that. Also influenced by the lingo that was going on everywhere, like at the restaurant and the bar. And my mother raised us with Chinese customs, so we followed that. But then on the American side, my father was a bartender, and he would always get advice from the patrons about how he should raise their kids. So it became this whole mixture of, you know, cross-cultural, and I still do that in my work today, but it's different medium. In the beginning, I was doing mixed medium in boxes, and now I'm doing line drawings. So.
Okay. I already mentioned that I grew up in Northern California, and I was inspired by my roots. I lived in California. Oh, this is another interesting thing. My parents were interned during World War II, so when they got out of the camps and moved back to California, they lived in the small community that I was telling you about, Yuba City, and there was my family. I had a lot of cousins, so but we all wanted to fit in as being an American, and my parents wanted us to fit in too. So they actually, other than having Japanese food or something like that, you know, it was just, we just wanted to be like everyone else. And then my parents tried to have us go to Japanese school on Saturdays, but that kind of ruined our plans, you know. So we all rebelled, and so none of us really learn Japanese other than hearing it with our grandparents, or my parents had a secret language, you know. So not until I was much older, in my late 40s, did I start wanting to learn the language. But anyway, when I came to New York for the first time, I was really inspired by Dorothea Rothburn's folded pieces. And so what I did when I moved to New York a couple years later, I started folding paper, and I came up with pseudo origami of using 6 pieces of paper to make a kimono shape. So the imagery of a kimono or anything of my heritage stayed with me. And I started folding it, and then first they were more simple and delineated. You could see the paper folds and everything, and then I started building it up, and I started adding first my family crests, or different mons, they call it, of different trades of different people. And then I started, a friend of mine sent me a vial of Mount St. Helen's dust, and or the ashes, and I incorporated it in one of my big kimono paintings. But then that led me to doing a huge body of work based on an erupting volcano, which is also very thinking about Mount Fuji, or science fiction films like Godzilla, or big brush paintings, big landscape paintings of Asian brushwork. So that all played in, and so I did another work. That was series, and then I did a series of waterfalls. But now, and then that turned into everyday objects, and I'm still with things that are surrounding me every day, that I'm inspired by everyday objects, but then also things that are Asian. So it's just a combination of everything. So if I have in the show that's at Eric Firestone right now, there's a volcano painting from the 80s, and then another painting from the 1990s that has a teapot in it. But within the teapot, there's always something else going on. So you'll just have to go and see it. But let's see, what was I going to say? I guess that's about it, except for that my heritage is still important to me. I'm just learning how to write, and it's more like an abstraction for me. I know what some of it means, and like tori is a rooster or a chicken, but it also means like a gate, just the way that you use the characters. So I'm kind of interested in that idea of transforming or using the calligraphy in my work, but it becomes more abstract. But that's an inspiration anyway. I guess that's it. And I continue going to Asia for inspiration.
Oh, thank you for sharing. This conversation is really personal, I realize, and it is a great pleasure and honor to get to know everyone in such public and well-documented way. I grew up in China, and I just became Asia recently, and I'm becoming American. So in the same sense that I was just a person growing up amongst other people, and the world map that was painted for me in my education and geographic and political education is only China and the West. There's no acknowledgement or attention or curiosity of anywhere else. I am actually in this process of actively re-educating myself of what is Asia by living in Queens. Because right now, where I live is practically Philippines, and I'm 5 blocks away from India, and then Nepal, and then Taiwan. And in the Filipino restaurant, I asked for chopsticks, and I would never humiliate myself like that again. And in terms of Americanness, I haven't made a conscious choice of becoming American, but it's just that the home is no longer. I don't think there is a China as I remembered or desire that I can go back to anymore. I'm just kind of end up here. So in that sense that I find this term Asian American problematic for me, but I can understand how I can be described as such. I was also thinking of this Japanese scholar Naoki Sakai, a translation theorist. He had a conversation with a Chinese scholar Sun Ge titled Universality and Particularity, where he talked about how Asian can be actually a research method instead of an object. It can actually be a perspective. Asian can be somewhere to look from instead of being looked at. And he said that, think of the West. There is no such a concept as the West. You can only be west of something. There's not a point on Earth that is a West. So the whole construct of West is actually based on the East. You might say that it is just being naughty linguistically, but I do think that there's something helpful in destabilizing these terms. Mm.
I was just going to say, I love that because, you know, when you talk about East and West, it kind of depends on which direction you're looking at, right?
And also, it's good to challenge things too. Like, because so much of this came out of, let's say, out of the '60s mindset. So obviously here we are, like 60 years later. So thinking about that. So I have one more question, and then we'd like to invite the audience to ask questions of our panelists and our curator. And in the future, East or West, in the future, how can we create more intergenerational, interdisciplinary dialogue for Asian American artists the way this wonderful U+ME exhibition does?
Well, first of all, thank you, Alvin and Alex, for creating this opportunity for this dialogue to begin. And I just want to ask, how many people here, if you could, by show of hand, would love to see more of this type of interdisciplinary, intergenerational discussions among artists? Raise your hand. Okay, great. So there's definitely the will. And I guess the next question then is, in a city so expensive and space is so precious, what can happen to make that, happen? I think that Asian Americans or Asian artists are having a hard time still because we don't have our own museum, we don't have a gallery that may be specifically interested in Asian American art. I think for that voice, our voices to be heard is kind of difficult. I mean, I don't know if you would agree. I know that for many years I was just, visiting galleries, museums, and I'm just trying to enjoy, and I do notice my experiences are missing on the wall. And there's just like, I don't know where to find Asian American artists. Like, I didn't even know you existed. So I think that's very common. But meanwhile, you're always here, right? You're like you're in my neighborhood. You're just living here. So I think that this is a great opportunity to talk. At the same time, I feel that, I think injecting this Asian American voice and experiences and viewpoint perspective is important. At the same time, what about this just like common human experience, which is so much more important in a world that is so much more interconnected? So there's a lot that are common that we can talk about. So yeah, I think my hope is that there is much more political support and will to make it happen, and I'm sure with all the creativity that could come from that it will happen.
Well, I think like throughout the decades, there have been like attempts at this Asian American Art Center, Basement Workshop, Godzilla. And today you have Think Chinatown, which is a great space where they have programs that actually, want to get people together. So I think there is like there are things going on. And as far as like galleries, museums, it's kind of elitist. So you have to remember that, it's always been like that, and it'll be like that for a while. So maybe the best places to do things are workshops in public spaces like libraries, West Bath, centers that are open to the public. So that's,
I think that this example is an interesting one, though. There are a lot of spaces that belong to somebody that if they would just say yes to somebody who is, independent-minded enough to propose an evening such as Alvin was, that's really all it takes, because a lot of these spaces, they don't do programming because they don't have like a real programming staff, or they don't think about it. But there's a lot of spaces that are underutilized in this great city.
Oh, I was thinking about, there are more galleries that are showing Asian and Asian American artists. Maybe there'll be another Godzilla that someone will form that would be inclusive, would have people or artists of several generations. That would be nice. But if you go to a gallery, you might see more Asian Americans or Asians sitting at the front desk, where that never used to happen before. There are more curators than before. I don't know if this happened because of Godzilla, but someone like Eugenie Tsai, when we met with the Whitney Museum, the time when it was early Godzilla days, she actually became one of the curators at the Whitney, and then went on to the Brooklyn Museum. And there were other curators as well. But and I'm thinking now there in some of the galleries there is actually 3 Japanese Americans right now. They're in their 30s, and 2 of them are at Pace Gallery, if you could go there and see their work. And there's Osamu Kobayashi, he's showing at Hollis Taggart. And all of the 3 shows are really wonderful. So you just have to kind of explore what's out there. But, and then there's the Godzilla show at Eric Firestone. Jen just, right now, currently.
Through March 16th.
Right, it's going to be up for a while, so it's getting a lot of attention. We couldn't have the show at MoCA for many different reasons. There's, sadness surrounding that, and for good reason. But this is an opportunity, and there could be other shows can grow from that. So it's not that we're that isolated, And I think there could be something online, dialogue, Zooms, or it doesn't have to be just New York based. Now that we have Zoom, it could be a dialogue with artists out in the West Coast or any place in the world, actually. But as far as being Asian American, I didn't say, when I go to Asia, I'm totally an American to them. So, it's quite different. Yes. I'm not Japanese American. I'm not a Japanese person there, or if I go to China, I'm an American.
Absolutely. Yes, and then the question was, how can we create more intergenerational, maybe interdisciplinary dialogue in the future for Asian American artists?
what I learned from the introduction, that this intergenerational or disciplinary conversation that is happening in the gallery was really something more like a chance or fate that I encountered in your experience, and you saw their kinship. I don't know how we can create more fate.
Create fate. Create fate. That's a good thing for the Lunar New Year. Yes.
Right. Happy New Year.
Great. Well, I guess Godzilla's put me back in the early 90s. I always think about, in all the mediums, like the theater, artists have discussion. I think of all things, I always go back to a quote from Reverend Sharpton, of all things after the Rodney King verdict, where he said, it's half of what we wanted, but twice as much as we've ever had. And I feel that's where we are right now, too. So on that note, everyone say, I'd like to open up do we have any questions for the artists or for the curator? Yes.
Sure. Question is, okay, I'm fine. I'm sorry I don't have to tell many people in this audience or living very, very, people are being singled out and hurt and damaged and become fearful. And I wonder if you would, any of you would be willing to talk about how that presence, that awareness, next week to the you were doing. How does the very space that we're in, where people are genuinely fearful, for good reason, that, if any, has it had an impact? How might you think about it? How do you think about that in your work?
I think about that a lot right now. I think this is a country where, as a lawyer especially, right, free speech, and when some people speak up and speak of their pain, or just, support a group that's, subjected to genocide now, they get fired from their work. And I think that, like many artists who may be idealistic, I still believe in, I think we should as a society believe in rights and justice and all those basic things. I feel there's this imbalance, right? And what's more fearful for me as an artist, or just as a human being, is that the amount of control of information out there, where people are now beginning to not know what are facts and what are lies, is very troubling. And so, obviously as a painter, I paint, and I do have paintings of like the pain that I see that are going on now. I think the kind of fear that people are experiencing, I think that we need to use every kind of language that we have available to us to keep that baseline humanity, so that we can continue to know, that we're just all human. I think some people, go out there and they protest, and we all should be in our own ways. I think fear is so prevalent right now. Is something so used to keep everybody under control. I know that in my art, I'm trying to put those feelings and react to it on canvas. I don't know if other people feel the same here.
I don't know if I'm understanding your question. I'm not sure if I'm understanding your question properly, but I did register a tremendous amount of pain when I first saw these paintings, and I think it has always been a question for me in looking at the pain of others, as Susan Sontag has written about the popularization of postcards of war image. On the one hand, a war photographer would think this is horrible, people should see it. On the other hand, they try to make the perfect composition and contrast because it is also beautiful. And I think by putting paintings on the wall in an institution like this, inevitably they are glorified. And I do think they are indeed beautiful to me too. And I don't quite have an answer to this conflict. But I do think there... Right. I do believe there are ways to handle them or looking at them or talk about them with care.
I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about Godzilla. I saw that show, which was just fabulous. And I wasn't sure how long...
Only two of them are part of Godzilla.
There was an important moment in New York art world. Is it still in existence?
No. It started in 1990. The founders were Ken Chu, Margo Machida, and Bing Lee. And they first met in Brooklyn, and they decided they wanted to invite more Asian American artists that they knew. Not only artists, but curators, writers, art administrators. And so we started meeting at each other's houses at first. The first meeting was at my house, but because I had a loft and they knew that I had a large enough space to handle at least 20 people. But then after that, it became very popular, and we had to start having the meetings at places like Artist Space and Art in General, the Alternative Museum, because it grew, and then we developed then we had a newsletter that was sent out throughout the country and then became very popular. You want to add anything to it, Stefani? Oh, one thing I want to say is that when I went to go to Pace to see the three Japanese American artists, when I went to Pace and I met Glenn Kaino, and I told him about the Godzilla show, he said, "Oh my gosh, Godzilla, you were in Godzilla? That was my inspiration in college." And I thought, oh, we're role models for for a younger generation, you know? So we had some of that.
It was interesting to hear Helen tell that story about Glenn Kaino because, you know, that newsletter just got sent out and you never knew where it ended up. So to get that kind of feedback 30 years later or whatever it is, you know, that's good.
Thank you. Any other questions for the panelists or for the curator?
I just wanted to say something. I'm going to sit down so you don't have to see me. I just wanted to respond to something that Yuchen said about, like, how do you create more fate? And I guess I just want to be clear that this show has nothing to do with being Asian American because neither of them are Asian American. Matthew Wong was from Canada. So I guess North American, sure, but he's not Asian American. Milton was not Asian American. This show has nothing to do with being Asian American. But while I was here, like sitting, listening to you guys talk about everything that you talked about, I think, you know, I have a strange relationship with this notion of being Asian American because in like my blood, my body, I am Asian American. My father is Korean, but he was adopted by Swedish people. So he did not grow up as a Korean person, but he was very much seen that way in the community that he grew up in, but I don't think he ever saw himself that way. So I was not raised as being, I wasn't raised with like Asian customs or anything like that. I was pretty much raised as a Swedish boy. But, you know, as I got older, like, or throughout my entire life, like, I felt Asian because people would say, "Are you Chinese?" or whatever. And so I share the experience of, like, experiencing racism, but at the same time, it's like I've had a very conflicted relationship with this notion of Asian American, because I don't want to be American. This country is fucked. But and I don't feel very Asian because I wasn't raised that way. But anyway, I just mean to say that, like, this idea of Asian American is, I think, always going to be complicated no matter how you experience it. So.
No, and I think it's getting more complicated all the time, and I like to think that we're here to really explore this and ask questions more than provide answers too. So I just really appreciate having this chance to really form and hopefully maybe expand what it is to be an Asian American, because obviously just what it means to be an American is getting more complicated since we got here. It's gotten more complicated. So so that goes with everything too. So it's something with that then too. So I just want I feel like there are two main things were, again, ut pictura poesis. As is painting, so is poetry, and also just dialogue, not diatribe. I want to thank the Milton Resnick Pat Passlof Foundation for having us. So thank you very much. Thank you. Okay, I want to thank all of our guest artists for participating tonight. Thank you so much. And of course, without you, we're nothing. So thank you so much, everyone, and Happy New Year! Happy New Year!